This minuscule ant is called the fire ant. Its scientific name is Solenopsis invicta. In Latin, invicta means unvanquished. The fire ant strikes fear in all those who cross its path, and with good reason. This ant is taking over the world. This is the story of a relentless struggle that should never have existed. The relatively unknown fire ant is the object of several studies, like this one in Texas. When it takes over a new territory, the fire ant begins by multiplying. A colony could contain up to 40 million individuals. It exerts total domination over the territory it conquers. It exterminates all other species, confiscates food for its own use, and ferociously defends its territory. Its formidable efficacy places the fire ant among the most devastating invasive species of the planet. It is commonly called the fire ant because of the burning venom that it injects with its stinger, located at the extremity of its abdomen. 100 million years ago, Solenopsis invicta wasn't an ant, but a wasp. The fire ant inflicts considerable ecological and economic damage. Agriculture pays a heavy price. Plants providing shelter in their roots or leaves must be examined and treated before being commercialized. Young livestock and poultry who are stung by fire ants are major losses. It costs the American economy several $billion each year. In order to understand the devastating success of this seemingly insignificant insect, scientists study the fire ant's strategies to conquer new territory and test methods to control its expansion. Will they be able to parry the attacks of these troops whose thirst for new territory appears unquenchable? The fire ant's odyssey began in Brazil. Solenopsis invicta originated in Mato Grosso in the southern Amazon forest. There, the fire ants were in competition with other ant species who were just as numerous, aggressive, and protective of their territory. Forced to share the resources, the fire ants were not the unleashed conquerors they would later become elsewhere. Rather, they blended into the ecosystem and were not considered hazardous. It was man who unwittingly gave them passage aboard ships, thereby opening new territories where competition was not so fierce for the ants. In less than a century, the fire ant has taken over the southern United States, attacked the Philippines, overrun China and Thailand, and entered Australia.
The red imported fire ants were originally introduced through the port of Mobile, Alabama, and the soil that was in ships, and then they would dump it was used as ballast to weigh the ship down. Then they would dump the soil out in the harbor to then take on the weight of cargo. And so the ants were in the soil and they slowly spread, and it took them many decades. This was in the early 1900s, and they didn't reach Texas until maybe the late 60s, early 1970s.
The change in biotope could have been fatal to the fire ant, but the opposite occurred. When the fire ant left its native region, its hitherto unsolicited but innate features were put to use. Professor in the entomology department at A&M University in Texas, Mickey Eubanks is a fire ant specialist. He has studied them for over 30 years.
Red imported fire ants are incredibly successful invaders for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons that they're so successful invading new territories is that they're very adapted to disturbance. For example, they can really handle flooding really well. So in their native habitats, they live in these floodplains that are prone to very severe flooding. And we see that here in the United States, where they can withstand flooding by forming these living rafts that allow a large percentage of the colony to survive in the water for a long time.
You can see the workers are amazingly strong. When I lift up with my forceps, you know, they'll produce these strings of workers that are just connected to each other. So they have very powerful mandibles and legs to make this happen.
Fire ants use their mandibles to cling to each other. This multifunctional tool is as powerful as a hydraulic jack. Workers hang on to one another, locking their mandibles and constructing a safety raft whose links are so tight the raft is water resistant.
Now, some of the workers that are forming this living raft, they're not going to be alive the whole time. They're going to sacrifice themselves. And they're willing to sacrifice for their sisters. And they're really willing to do this because of this unique genetic system that they have called haplodiploidy.
In a haplodiploid system, unfertilized eggs hatch to reveal males who are the worker ants. Fertilized eggs release females, the queen ants. As a result, a male carries only half as many genes as a female. Since evolution is based on the transmission of any given species' genes to the next generation, for the fire ants, it's preferable that the males, the workers, sacrifice themselves.
And that's what's happening here. They're actually, give their lives to prevent the rest of the colony from drowning.
Mickey Eubanks travels the world over to study fire ants. But it is on this lake that he leads his daily research on the surprising capacity of adaptation of this uncommon insect.
Oh, I see fire ants climbing up this dead tree. That might mean there's a raft that has touched the tree, and now they're coming off the water.
The raft is constructed in a few minutes. It floats because fire ants are hydrophobic. The chitin, which envelops the ant's body and protects it, is waterproof. The water ripples against the surface without entering the body.
It's made up of thousands of fire ant workers. Thousands of them are forming the basal layer that's on top of the water. And then on top of that layer will be hundreds or thousands of additional fire ants. Many of them will be carrying the larvae or the babies of the colony. They use those strong mandibles, their strong legs, to really hold on to each other.
When Mickey lightly pushes down on the raft, it doesn't sink. The very high density of the ants linked together ensures its cohesion. As such, a colony can float hundreds of kilometers on any type of water.
No matter how long you study these fire ants, they never cease to amaze you, and they're just so impressive. And then you can see some of the larvae, though, unfortunately for them, get used as sort of like life rafts. So this raft will stay together until it touches some emergent aquatic vegetation or something like this dead tree that we see here. And as soon as the raft comes in contact with the dead wood or the vegetation, the workers are just going to start scrambling up out of the water. And many of them, again, will be taking these larvae or the babies of the colony up the vegetation or up this dead tree to escape from drowning. That's their priority at this point, is to save the babies from drowning. Very efficient, very effective. Whoop, whoop. We don't want to get too close to the tree or they'll start coming in the kayak.
If the raft drifts for too long, the workers are forced to eat some of the larvae and eggs to avoid starvation. When the raft lands, the ants get off and find their way to dry land. The colony is safe. The fire ants, who have avoided drowning and survived famine, now look for new territory. Well adapted to the hazards of the humid tropical forest, fire ants are intrepid voyagers. They can climb mountains, cross rivers, and bypass deserts. Urban zones don't faze them either. On the contrary, if the fire ants discover a sizable piece of land, they won't hesitate to call downtown home. Walter Schinkel is the world expert on fire ants. His book, The Fire Ants, published in 2006, is the Bible for all those who work in the field.
I don't like the word invasive because it's a metaphor of war. My interest is not in fire ant eradication or control or anything like that. It's basic biology of ants. The main thing that is specialized about fire ants is its large colony size. We live in a hot climate, and the ants cannot travel those distances above ground. So they have evolved an underground foraging tunnel system. It's just a series of tunnels like rivers coming out from the mound that give them access to all parts of the territory.
Digging a tunnel in clay, sand, or pebbles requires adapted tools and technologies. What Walter Schinkel studies, life-sized, is the fire ant's behavior in man-modified terrain.
We have plots here, they're all 10 square meters. We've either tilled the soil, which is a disturbance, obviously. We've shaded them. Fire ants are reputed not to like shade, right? We get decent survival of newly-mated queens in plots that have been tilled. Then we know that tilling favors their survival. If we get poor survival in untreated plots, then we know there's something there that doesn't favor their survival.
The looser the earth, the easier it is to dig. The workers spin a network of galleries, some of which dip all the way down to the water table, the layer of soil that is saturated with water. The workers never stop digging. They are constantly opening new tunnels, connecting them, and adapting them to climatic conditions. In warm seasons, the galleries provide protection from drought. In the winter, they provide warmth. Fire ants do not hibernate. They can withstand cold temperatures down to 10 degrees below 0 degrees Celsius. The nest is a veritable underground empire, home to up to 250,000 individuals.
The fire ant is an ecological specialist that exploits disturbed habitat. Now, in its home in South America, that disturbance was largely natural. But with the advent of humans and with the transport to North America, then of course, most of the disturbed habitat is human-caused. So we clear land, we clear the natural forest that would cover the southeastern U.S. For agriculture, for building houses, for businesses, roadsides, parks. So once the ant arrived in the United States, it found itself fundamentally in paradise, because here was this vast amount of disturbed habitat we call synanthropous species, that is, species that are associated with humans. It's been an extremely successful immigrant, at least as successful as humans, right? They are simply opportunists, that's all they are.
Some scientists have to travel the world over to do research, but Walter Schenkel has the privilege of conducting his research on the Florida State University campus in Tallahassee, where he teaches. With the help of his students, Walter has already exposed 15 meters of tunnels, which gives an idea of the digging capacity of the fire ant, barely 6 millimeters long, and of the extent of its underground network. Walter highlights the galleries with orange tooth powder. Non-toxic, the tooth powder dissolves in water. It allows the ants to be counted without disrupting them.
4 underground foraging tunnels that radiate out from the central mound give them access to every part of their territory. The system protects them from heat and predation, so they can travel long distances to cover their entire foraging territory.
Walter has also discovered that all the fire ants' nests are interconnected, a phenomenon called unicoloniality. Thousands of soldiers, for conquering or for defending, can be mobilized in the wink of an eye.
Here in the Tallahassee area, the mature size is probably 250,000 workers. In order to defend the territory, they have to blanket an area of, on average, 100 square meters with workers, foragers that go out, and that's how the boundaries are established when they meet workers from neighboring colonies. The average lifespan of a colony like that is about 7 to 8 years, and it's a single queen, so it's one giant family of sisters, and they're all complete sisters. There's one father and one mother. Territorial behavior is the core of fire ant biology. It's a species that defends an absolute territory against its neighbors, that is, other. And it does so by sending out foragers from the central nest. They move through underground foraging tunnels and come up in various parts throughout the territory, until they eventually run into foragers from the neighboring colony. And when they do, they are aggressive to one another, and they either fight and then run away, or they just turn back and run back into their own territory where they came from.
The local ant species called the harvester ant is much bigger than the fire ant, and yet it cannot measure up to the latter. In combat, Invicta displays an exacerbated aggressiveness that most often leads to the defeat or even the death of the adversary. Fire ants don't bite. They use their mandibles to cling to the enemy. Once they are solidly latched on, they inject their venom from the stinger at the end of their abdomen. They can sting 7 or 8 times in a row because, unlike bees or wasps, their stinger does not detach once stuck into the enemy's body. When the fire ant engages in combat, it immediately emits a chemical signal, an odor. When a fellow fire ant receives the signal, it arrives immediately as backup. Very quickly, a fire ant cohort takes down the enemy, which finally succumbs after the violent assault. The local ants are beaten. The fire ant stinger is a mighty blade, spiked with harpoon-like points. The venom, colored here in red, is highly concentrated formic acid, like bee and wasp poison, and just as painful. The fire ant attacks all living things, humans, animals, and insects alike. Each year, millions of people are stung. More often, the stings leave no more than a bad memory, but the pustules may be infected and leave scars lasting for several weeks. Some fire ant victims die from anaphylaxis, or an allergic reaction to the venom, or because they are weak or disabled and unable to flee. Fire ants can also cause major material damage. Attracted to heat, they climb into electric circuits and cause short circuits that destroy transformers, signal lights, airport runway lights, and even start house fires. Each year, the fire ant causes hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. Public opinion now considers the fire ant a plague that must be eliminated at all costs. The fire ant travels as a stowaway via lumps of earth, trees, and even animals that are transported from one place to another. Farmers dread the fire ant not only for its painful sting, which can handicap and slow production, but also for its impact on crops. Scientists have proven the ant's destructive effect on plants, and particularly on buds. Fire ants have struck a surprising alliance with aphids, microscopic pests that feed off plant sap.
It turns out that fire ants are incredibly attracted to honeydew. So honeydew is excess sugar water that is excreted by aphid scales and other insects. They consume the honeydew, and that gives them lots of sugar. But in turn, they protect these aphids and other honeydew-producing insects from ladybird beetles and other predators. And we hypothesize that it's because there are truly arboreal ants in South America, and we don't have any of these in the United States. And so all of a sudden, they had free access to this honeydew, and we think it's a really important that it plays a really important role in the invasion success of fire ants.
It's a win-win situation. Thanks to the fire ant's protection, the aphids can multiply over and over. The accumulation of honeydew on the leaves blocks photosynthesis and in certain circumstances facilitates the development of mold. The plants die. In the southern United States, crop quantity and quality have considerably diminished. Each year, the federal government spends more than $1 billion to compensate for the damage.
I always found it ironic, I guess, that in the United States, we are an immigrant nation, and we understand the importance of immigration to success in life. And yet, we have this immigrant ant, which has done pretty much the same thing that humans have as far as biological success in North America, and we hate it with a passion.
Today, fire ants have taken possession of the entire local ecosystem, gravely threatening its equilibrium. Dr. Sanford Porter is the director of the Agricultural Research Service in Gainesville, Florida. He's convinced that one of Invicta's parasites is the key to curbing the fire ant's expansion.
When we go to South America, the fire ants in South America are only about 1/5 to 1/10 of as abundant. So we have 5 to 10 times as many fire ants in the United States. If we can bring up the right kinds of natural enemies, then we'll be able to keep the populations of the fire ants low forever.
We have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Pseudactyon curvatus, also known as the zombie fly, is a solitary parasitoid present in tropical zones and in temperate regions such as the southern United States. This minuscule fly, hardly bigger than an Invicta ant head, is diabolically Machiavellian. It positions itself near a fire ant colony and chooses its target. Under an electronic microscope, it's possible to see the curved bump which gives this fly its Latin name. The curved hooks are stylets that pierce the ant's chitin. In a flash, the zombie fly injects its eggs into the thorax of its victim.
Over here, 6, 7, 8. We bring in a few grams of ants from the field, and then we let the flies emerge into the box. The lifter lids start raising up and down, and as they raise up and down, the ants run back and forth between each of the cups. As they're running back and forth trying to move the brood from one cup to the other to keep them in the dark, the flies attack them. Fire ants are alarmed or disturbed. They let off a chemical that alarms the rest of the nestmates. The problem is when they do that, the flies can smell it. Then they begin diving in and hovering about 2 or 3 millimeters above the fire ants. And in just a fraction of a second, they inject an egg into the thorax of the ant, into the body of the ant. Each of the flies has about 200 eggs in it. And so once the fly begins attacking, it'll attack ant after ant, several ants each minute, injecting eggs into the ants.
What follows is blood-curdling. The zombie fly's egg hatches and transforms into a maggot that feeds off its host's vital fluids. The maggot then migrates through the ant's thorax towards the head, its final destination. During the 2-week period of the maggot's slow migration, the ant continues to live as normal, or so it seems. Once the maggot arrives in its victim's head, the maggot devours the brain to form a cocoon. At this point, the ant has become useless to the maggot, who secretes an enzyme to decapitate its host.
One interesting thing about these flies is that when the maggots begin growing in the ant's head, it takes over control of the ant's behavior. It kind of turns the ant into little zombies. So each of the ants are behaving according to what the fly wants and not necessarily what the ants want. So the fly makes the ant go into some place of the colony where it's safer, and the ant wanders around looking for leaf litter or some place to die. What's happening in the lab is similar to what's happening in the field. But in the field, what is happening is that the ant is looking for a place to die because the fly or the maggot would want the ant to do.
Once the fire ants have been infected by the zombie flies, Dr. Porter reintroduces them into their original nest. Each contaminated ant is a Trojan horse that introduces the parasite into the heart of the citadel. Once they have grown to maturity, the maggots will spawn a new generation of killers.
These flies are self-sustaining biological control agents. That means that once they're established, the population grows and expands without having to release the flies every year. And they will be able to help with biological control as long as the fire ants are in the United States.
Instead of spreading insecticides, the United States plans to use biocontrolled agents. The zombie flies don't upset the ecological balance. When the number of ants decreases, the flies won't have any more to eat and will die. For Operation Zombie to work, 5,000 to 10,000 flies will have to be introduced into the system because the flies are effective only across a small surface area. Fire ants have a predilection for disturbed habitats. Cemeteries, for example, where the soil is frequently turned, are full of nests. Sanford Porter carries out his experiments in the cemetery in its town of Gainesville.
One of the things that we find very exciting about these flies is even though the fire ants have been in the United States for 70 to 80 years, the fire ants recognize these flies as enemies. And it's in their genes. They have a whole variety of defenses against the flies. So we know that the flies have had enough impact on the fire ants to cause the evolution of these behaviors in the fire ants. So we're hoping that these natural enemies will be able to tilt the ecological balance so that the fire ant densities here in the United States can drop to levels like they are in South America, where fire ants largely aren't a problem.
The fire ants carrying the zombie fly larvae are reintroduced into the nest. For every fly born, there will be dozens of victims. The generation of zombies introduced into the nest by Dr. Porter has hatched. The flies are ready to attack. The zombies launch an air raid. Each fly briefly lands on the back of an ant and injects its egg into the ant's thorax. The ants emit an alarm pheromone that causes panic in the nest. Wild with fright, the worker ants stop digging and abandon the eggs and larvae. The colony founders into a state of anarchy that will be fatal to its existence.
These flies are so specific to fire ants that when they run out of fire ants, the answer is they simply die. These natural enemies will never eradicate fire ants in the United States. That is not possible, but it is possible fire ant populations can be reduced by 80 to 90%. And if we only had 1/10 the number of fire ants as we have now, we'd be much happier.
If Solenopsis invicta has been dealt a blow in its conquest of America by the zombie flies, the situation is different elsewhere in the world. Helped along by man's carelessness, the fire ant has profited like never before from the explosion of world commerce. After invading parts of Asia, the fire ant is now a major challenge for Australia. The Australian government estimates the damage done by fire ants may cost the country $43 million. Ross Wiley is an entomologist for biosecurity, an organization specialized in the fight against the fire ant invasion since the ants were first discovered in Brisbane.
The first fire ants we know came into Brisbane in 2001, and they came in as two separate introductions. There was one at the port of Brisbane, and there was one in the western parts of Brisbane. There were some ceramic pots that had been brought in from the United States, and we thought that might have been the cause. And the genetics confirm this. The genetics tells us that we did in fact get our fire ants from the southern United States, both from Texas and from Florida.
In September 2001, the government of Queensland launched an eradication campaign. Teams of specialists sprayed the ground with insecticides adapted to fight against the Solenopsis invicta. At first, the initiative seemed to be effective, but when nests outside the treated zones were discovered, disappointment reigned. The fire ants pursued their advance, applying two strategies that allowed them to persevere in the face of all obstacles.
There are two forms of the ant. There are colonies that have single queens, and we call those monogynes, and there's colonies that have got multiple queens, many queens, and we call those polygyne. Now, monogynes don't like other fire ants or other ants. They tend to live separately, but they do have queens that are strong flyers, and they can fly up 2 kilometres usually, but perhaps up to 5 or 10 kilometres. So their main dispersal is by flight.
When a nest has too many mouths to feed, newly hatched queens have to leave and find new territory. The workers follow, and thus the fire ant never ceases to increase its territory.
We have polygyne colonies. These are the multiple queens, and they get on quite well with each other, so that you can have many mounds in a small area, and that's forming almost a super colony. Now, they don't fly very far. Their queens are weak flyers or sometimes don't fly at all. So they tend to move only very short distances from the parent nest, so they spread slowly. But the danger is that because they have so many queens, they can be easily transported by man in soil movements, in pot plants, anything. They can be moved around readily. So in that sense, they're a little bit more dangerous for spread.
A single colony with several queens is what Russ Wiley calls polygyne. A nest can have several dozen. The queen's only function is to lay eggs. There may be as many as 90,000 queens on 1 hectare of territory colonized by Solenopsis invicta. Given that a queen lays 100 eggs per day, the population can grow by 9 million individuals daily. This dizzying power to multiply is a scientist's nightmare.
So we use the genetics to determine whether we have a monogyne colony or a polygyne colony. If we have a polygyne colony, then we will then do tracing, because we know that material must have moved there from somewhere, and we get our inspectors to trace back and see if they can find out where that polygyne colony came from. If we find it, then we can kill it again.
Okay, can you flag that in?
Once the trackers have found a hitherto unlisted colony, they fix its geographical coordinates with a GPS. The location is transmitted to a database that allows for precise control of the zone. The trackers take a series of samples from the colony that are analyzed by the genetics lab in Brisbane. The analysis determines whether the colony is polygyne or monogyne. Because polygyne colonies reproduce faster, they are destroyed first.
And now we're battling that third and final population, but the genetics can tell us whether there's anything else around any other populations that we haven't discovered. Hi guys.
Hi Ross.
Hi Evan, hi Brad. Did you end up getting that sample yet from
Yes, Ross.
from Gary?
Yes, we've just run it
And
now.
you've done it already?
It's all run.
Oh wow.
As you can see, it's a polygyne nest.
Yep.
So it's very...
Finally, genetics is showing us at the moment that I think we are winning the battle, or at least getting on top of the ant, because the genetics says there's reduced genetic diversity of the ant, and this may result in reduced fitness of the ant to survive. It will not adapt as well as it could.
The success in Australia is based on the systematic controls of Brisbane and the surrounding area. Unlike the rather cautious approach in the United States, Australian policy has been to take great measures, immediately investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the fight against the fire ant. A thermal imaging camera attached to a helicopter is used to detect nests 150 meters away. For the first time in the history of this invasion, remote sensing is now used to search and then destroy the enemy hidden underground.
The remote sensing is that we exploit the shape of a termite mound. A termite mound, by its particular shape, has got a thermal signature. In winter, it heats up, and sometimes it's about 20 degrees Celsius more than the surrounding soil. The idea behind all of this is that if we can get ahead of the ant, if we know where the edge of the infestation is, then we can start to treat from the outside. We'll be ahead of it for the first time, and then we can start to move in and kill the ant. The advantage of that for the program is going to be that we're able to cover large areas of land from the air. We can cover 750 hectares a day with remote sensing, which is much more than we could ever do on the ground with teams of people.
Perhaps surprisingly, in a country the size of Australia, remote sensing costs close to 5 times less than classic means of searching.
Had a chance to have a look at it yet?
Yeah, I started, I think, fun one, but I'm not too sure.
Okay. All right. Well, let's
The images recorded by the cameras are analyzed with an application that allows for an even more precise localization.
So with this technology, we can do probably in a couple of hours what it would have taken us, a team, 2 or 3 days to achieve. But everything is all about speed, and this will certainly enable us to do what we need to do to get ahead of the ant. What's the plans? This was completed yesterday, so we're now flying in this area.
Now that nests can be localized, the race is on. Fire ants must be left no chance to form new colonies. Ross Wiley supervises the final preparations of this eradication plan.
We had problems with the winds, very strong winds, so we moved across into an ARTE.
The goal is to confine the nests and to prevent any queens from surviving.
That's it, nice and easy.
Vehicles carrying toxic products are sent to the terrain.
Nice and easy. Okay, that'll do ya.
Okay, what we're going to do now is do a direct nest injection. What that involves is that we'll spear the nest around the outside to close off any foraging tunnels so the worker can't grab the queen and let her escape. Once we've done a nest assessment, we will then shower the whole area and flood the nest and then cover the nest back up and completely treat the nest with the chemical. Once that process has been done, we will then use all-terrain vehicles to go around and bait the area as a precaution, just to make sure that if the queen has escaped, the toxicants will then be effective and we'll kill the nest completely.
Eradicators spread granules, called pills, around each nest. The pills are coated with a substance the ants find to their liking. The workers immediately carry the granules into the nest and eat them. The queen, naturally, takes part in the feast. The active product in the pill slowly spreads through her body. In a few hours, the queen has been made sterile. Unable to reproduce, the colony is condemned to extinction. Is Solenopsis invicta, invincible in name only?
Apart from now the genetics that we've talked about and the remote sensing, the other tool that we use very much and rely on is public awareness. And some of our figures show us that in Brisbane region, for instance, 97% of people in southeast Queensland are aware of fire ants. About 50% of people say that they go out into their backyards and they look for ants and notify us if they find anything suspicious. And the other encouraging statistic is that in the last 3 years, 69% of all new findings of fire ants in southeast Queensland have come from the public.
Hello everybody, my name's Amanda and I'm from Biosecurity Queensland. How are we all today? Good. Now I've brought a very special guest along with me today.
The dog?
A dog, absolutely. Good boy, Akka! Good boy. Oh, good boy. Oh, he really likes it. I think I'm here to talk to you about today. Yes, what do you think? Fire ants.
School children in Queensland are informed of the dangers of fire ants. Their knowledge will benefit the entire economy.
And crickets as well.
We also provide training for various industries as to how they can do their own surveillance for fire ants. To do that, they need to be trained, and we would run something like 200 training courses in a year for members of the public and for people in business, and a lot of work put into what we call community engagement. We are battling the ant here, but there's always new incursions occurring and could occur in different parts of Australia. We have very tight movement controls on movement of, say, nursery stock or anything that may carry fire ants. We do not allow this to move outside what we call the restricted area.
At all ports of entry, cargo that could be carrying fire ants is put into quarantine. In Brisbane, dogs have been trained to detect the pheromones the ants emit from up to 40 meters away.
Vince, here. Wait.
The question of whether the fire ant is a pest or not, if you're talking seriously as a scientist or as a public official, is a complicated question. There's many, many different species whose good fortunes depend strictly on humans. English sparrow, rats, mice. To me, I don't think it's a pest. It's just another ant, another creature that has found an opportunity that humans make for it, and it's exploiting that opportunity. That it's not warfare, it's ecology.
Few countries are equipped to deal with such an invasion, and even fewer have the necessary budget. And yet recent studies show that half the Earth's surface could be colonized by fire ants. Solenopsis invicta is not even close to slowing its invasion. In ports all around the world, boats are waiting at the dock, ready for passengers to get on board.